of introducing the topic and with some background, when COVID-19 first hit the African continent, stringent lockdown measures saw most economies in Africa and, of course, around the world grinding almost to a complete halt. These measures, including stringent and, of course, very necessary social distancing guidelines, brought about massive job losses. In agriculture, the result was millions of farmers and informal workers in Africa being out of a job. And that meant a significant drop in their production and, of course, in their income. So to compound the situation, locust invasion sweeping through many parts of East Africa continues to ravage crops, to destroy agricultural fields, and to destroy food supply. It means drought in West Africa and conflict in other parts of the continent have also put food supply in incredible danger. As many of our guests will very well know, 60% of sub-Saharan Africa consists of farmers, agriculture alone making up around 20% of this region's GDP. So these factors, all of these factors, means that the gains made by African leaders over the past decade, particularly in food security, is now under serious threat. The United Nations estimating that the number of people living with acute hunger may well double by the end of this year to over 250 million people. So to this end, ONE and AGRA are launching a paper in tandem with this conference today, looking at what leaders must now do to prevent COVID-19 and locust infestations in particular from exacerbating an already growing hunger crisis. As you will know, the UN just this week again releasing yet another paper tackling some of its concerns. So over the next hour, our guests will take a deep dive into the factors that impact food security on the African continent, and very importantly, we'll start to plot a way forward. Just a note for our guests who are dialing into this conference on the continent, we are recording this session, and we will also be posting a link to that paper that I mentioned by ONE and AGRA. That paper is entitled How to Stop Hunger from Becoming More Deadly Than the Virus. So to kick us off, I'm going to introduce our guests who will form part of this panel discussion today. Edwin Ikhouria is ONE's Africa Executive Director. He's leading ONE's advocacy work across the African continent. Edwin, hi.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Fadel Ndiame is a rural development expert. He's got some 30 plus years of experience in agriculture and economic development policies and programs. Dr. Ndiame, can you just say hello to everyone?
Michelle, hello everybody. Thank you for having us.
And of course, Dr. Emma Naluyima is a farmer. She's got proven skills in piggery, in fishery, in vegetables, training, development and capacity building, and in innovation in farming. We're battling with some internet gremlins in the system, and we're hoping to get her online just as soon as we can as well. So let's get straight into our discussion today. I want to start with our guests, Edwin and Dr. Ndiame. Even before COVID-19 hit, a population, this is in fact the first opening line on that paper published by ONE and AGRA, a population more than twice the size of the United States went to bed hungry every night. That's 135 million people who were experiencing hunger so severe that it threatened not only their livelihoods, but their lives as well. Perhaps, Edwin, just to kick our discussion off, these challenges that we're facing now that are compounded by COVID-19, they are not new.
True. They're definitely not new. It's been on the increase for a while. There have been, the number of people who have what we call food insecure on the African continent, has not gone down, exacerbated by crisis. In the belt, climate change itself has been a major reason why food production had gone down, and so people have been food insecure. Quite a large number have been food insecure for a time. So it's not entirely new, but given this circumstance, given the situation of COVID-19, it just makes things worse. And so you're not only dealing with a health emergency, you're also dealing with a food emergency. Of course, as you've heard the announcement from the World Food Programme and from the FAO, this could become worse than even the pandemic in terms of the number of lives that will be affected in the millions, across the world. But particularly in Africa, where we are dealing with several shocks, like we talked earlier. It's not just the pandemic where people are not able to go to work, or people are able to go to farm, or those who even produce are not able to transport their food, right? There's the locust infestation that is coming in from East Africa, coming in from the Middle East, flowing into East Africa, and that worsening the situation. Then there is, of course, the drought in West Africa that you mentioned earlier. Then there is a crisis. Boko Haram in Nigeria just killed almost 100 people in one night, destroying a whole village and catching away livestock and food. Those kind of crises do not even allow people, smallholders, to go to farms anymore. So this has been really compounded, and it's not a new story, but it's just getting worse, and with all of the new things, the new emergencies that we are seeing.
And I suppose, Fadel, this brings us to the issue around the resilience of the African continent, our ability to be more prepared so that when these crises hit, as they do sometimes at the same time, as we're seeing now, drought in West Africa, locusts in East Africa, COVID-19, conflict on some parts of the country, that we are able to absorb at least some of those shocks. How prepared are we, and how do we rate in terms of resilience?
Thank you so much, Michelle. I think that question is extremely important. And to build on what Edwin said, I think the COVID-19 is actually revealing and amplifying structural challenges that we are faced with on the continent. Now, the truth, though, is the African leadership have actually recognized the challenge, and it's central in most of the agenda that have been articulated in CADEP, but also in the Malabo Declaration, where you have a significant focus on improving productivities, strengthening system, and enabling African producers, consumers, and government to strengthen their capacity to absorb these shocks, to be able to adapt to the changing environment, which is, as Edwin mentioned, climatic, but also economic, price volatility. And finally, to drive a transformation agenda that takes into account all those issues. Now, COVID-19 has revealed how ill-prepared we have been. Now, the truth is, for the last 10, 20 years, significant progress has been made in terms of bringing political will, government commitment to prioritize agriculture, and some countries are doing pretty well in terms of driving productivity increase, providing a delivery system that enables input, access to market and finance to SMEs and to smallholder farmers. But to your point, this crisis has shown that we need to do better and to do it faster in a more organized way. So the point is we need to strengthen the resilience of our health and seed and food system at the same time. Basically, you have to bridge the two. You need with health issue, as Edwin is talking about, but while you're doing it, you should make sure that you are also taking into account the mitigating factors that are preventing you from enhancing production and productivity. I think we are in the middle of this beautiful crisis, which requires collective action.
Well, just as a note to our guests and the rest of our panel, Emma Naluyima, a Ugandan smallholder farmer, has now joined us on the call, or she had joined us a little earlier. Just as soon as we have Emma back on the line, we will get her take on, whether government has fulfilled that role that you've talked about just now, Fadel, in terms of supporting smallholder farmers, given how important, how critical a part of the system they are when it comes to food security in particular. So in terms of your experience in covering the various challenges and in writing this paper as one, Edwin, in terms of what you're seeing with governments providing the necessary support, particularly to smallholder farmers. We know that they make up 60% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa. They're so incredibly important, essential to the puzzle piece of ensuring food security. How well are governments doing in terms of that kind of support?
I don't know if I can be frank enough here to say they've not done very well. They've definitely shifted from where we were, like in 2003 when the Maputo commitment was made, right? The role of agriculture was seen, and the role of smallholders in that ecosystem was also appreciated. And then the commitment was made in 2003. But fast forward in 2014, when we came to the Malabo conversation, right? It was realized that not enough, the investment, at least to determine the priority of a country, you will look at their budget. So when you see the level of investment that have been made, or allocation that have been made, or expenditure that have been made for agriculture among African countries, very few actually, a handful have lifted up to that commitment, have gone up to those commitments of at least 10% of the national budget on agriculture. But the majority haven't. And when we look at the scorecards, there are other pillars that Dr. Fadel have talked about in terms of the different components or the pillars of that as enunciated in the CADEP framework. But the key part that you come back to your question on smallholders, the support that they need, right? So there's a lot of conversation about it is not the government's business to be in agriculture, right? But when you do not create the environment that enables smallholders to thrive, like access to finance, access to seeds. One of the things that is the most difficult part is even access to land. There's smallholders, women farmers. The question, how many of them really have titles to land to give them the capacity to be able to produce, consistently, predictably, and if you don't have access to land, then you can't have access to finance. So what are the deliberate policies that have been put in place to really reach them where they are? Access to seeds, good technology is coming out, improved seeds are coming out. How easy is it for smallholders to get access to those seeds, except there's a comprehensive, robust, framework from the government to give them access? And so these processes are still, epileptic. Some places are doing it well, some are not doing it well. And like Dr. Fadel said, it's about how do we get a comprehensive program that is consistent, that can bring them on board. Some countries have done well. They created a national database for farmers, including smallholder farmers, and then designing programs to reach them. But the efficiency with which those programs have been delivered is still in question. And so those are those kind of challenges we've seen over the years. So I would say they've done what they have done, but the progress is really slow. It has not really reached where it should reach. And these people, the smallholders, kind of supply, most of the food that we are not importing on the African continent.
Fadel, do you want to also just add to that discussion around whether governments are doing enough in terms of supporting smallholder farmers?
Now, clearly, given what we are experiencing now, we are not doing enough. I mean, it's like the glass half full or half empty. If you compare the situation now to where we were 20 years ago, you see some progress. And I think the most significant I see is political commitment to agriculture, allocating public resources to really serving, especially the smallholder component, which, as we will come back to it, I mean, to solve the problem, you need to understand how complex it is. It's not an easy fix. Just to give you a specific example, most of the smallholders we are talking about produce food. So what you want is for them to produce more, have a surplus, and take it to the market. But in most of the continent, the same producers are net buyers of food, which means they don't produce enough to satisfy their own need. So you have to solve two problems. Now, the focus that most countries are doing as part of their national priorities to promote productivity-enhancing intervention is noticeable across the board. I think the big challenge, because of the nature of the smallholder farming, they are small, as the name implies, but they are also scattered in vast geography, which means servicing those smallholders is very difficult. You have very high transaction cost. So a systematic intervention means investing in a delivery system, basically working through small and medium enterprises, through cooperative, through small businesses who will provide seeds, fertilizer, access to market, and also enable smallholder farmers to increase their productivity and their livelihood. Yeah. It's that investment that requires to be done consistently over time. It's not stop and go. You don't do it for a while, things improve, you let go. And I think where this crisis is calling us, again, around resilience, you need a dedicated effort to build this infrastructure. You need significant level of coordination across government, because it's not only Ministry of Agriculture, what we're talking about. Infrastructure is important. Health, local development, trade, because some of our countries have a surplus, while the next door they have a deficit. African countries agreed to have a regional food trade, a continental free trade agreement. This is a beautiful innovation. In practice, though, we are still faced with many hurdles, intentional or not. And I think this is where this COVID-19 is bringing us back to the drawing board, as Edwin is suggesting. The magnitude and the size of the problem is such that it requires a much elevated level of action, where you have short-term intervention, in which you need really to support, as a matter of urgency, the most vulnerable groups. Those ones will never be able to make it on they don't have the income, they rely on remittances. So government has some facilities and mechanisms of providing, social safety net, etc. So these are very urgent measures. But on the other hand, if just very quickly, if you are in in Southern Africa, like Mozambique and South Africa, some of those farmers are already in their harvest season. What is required there is different from what is required in West Africa. Here, the focus should be what should you do to make sure that you don't have post-harvest losses, because we need all the food we can have. So there are dedicated interventions that needs to happen through SMEs, working with the private sector, creating a policy environment, treating agriculture as a special priority sector, therefore enabling those operators to move around despite the lockdown so that they can offtake the production. If you are in East Africa, some of them are currently planting. The challenge is not only access to input, but also access to advisory services. You have beautiful experiences in countries like Rwanda, Kenya, where they are deploying fantastic technology based on digital and mobile technology, so that farmers have access to information on what to plant, where, what are the prices, etc. In West Africa, I think the crisis have given a wake-up call to everybody. You have a significant amount of mobilization at all countries, but also at the regional economic committees level to prepare for the campaign. The challenge is we can't afford to miss one campaign. Availability of input, support to farmers, conducive policy environment, enabling regional food trade are significant imperative. But we also have to admit that now all the leaders and the private sector, there is a significant momentum of mobilizing around that. I think this action has to be coordinated through government that needs to provide leadership, because this is where government leadership is crucial to make sure that you have a concerted action to support government, smallholder farmers, and SME to respond effectively to the COVID-19 challenge.
So I suppose here would have been a good time to bring in the African Union. You talk about a coordinated response between various organizations within governments in countries, but what about a coordinated response on the continent? Edwin, it would have been great to speak to the AU today to get a sense of what their duty should be in an environment like this.
Yeah, it's true, but I think they've done a bit. They've done quite a lot in that sense, in terms of creating a national, a continental norm, a continental agreement, or a continental framework. There's the CAADP framework that has been led from the AU as well. Then there is, of course, the scorecards now, for instance, which is kind of an accountability mechanism, a mechanism that they've put in place to kind of score countries based on their performance against the different pillars that the commitments that have been made. And from the scorecards and this accountability mechanism, working with civil society organizations and other farmer groups across the continent, they're also helping to hold governments to account. And I think in that note, as much as they could do, they're already doing the very best. But again, the sovereignty of nations is still the sovereignty of nations. So the AU itself can only still be an advocacy organization, even though it's the body that helps to galvanize the thoughts and galvanize and mobilize action in specific areas like agriculture. But I think they've done quite a bit in that regard. I would give them real kudos in terms of driving that accountability process. They make the heads of state commit. They made the heads of state agree on an accountability framework in that sense, and I think that itself is good. But the challenge again is that ultimately the decision rests. So the political will is one thing, but it has to go from a political commitment, whether at the AU or anywhere else, into specific action, designed transformation, strategies designed and implemented. If you listen to what Dr. Fadel said, I think this is very important. Many times across the African continent, it's not about the policies. These policies are there. And in fact, there are very fantastic strategies. When you see some agricultural development plans or transformation plans, you will see all of the right elements are in there. But how do you translate those from the pages of a paper into actual food on the table, into the right logistics, into the right coordination mechanism, to the right mobile payment system, the right digital infrastructure that will make sure every smallholder and big holder farmers have access to these, to the inputs, to the seeds, to the technology, those kind of things. It is that implementing those is the biggest challenge. And what COVID has done has shown that you can no longer keep quiet. Let's face it. Several protests, food protests, have happened in this recent time. And honestly, in Nigeria, for instance, and as you see in many other African countries, with a large informal sector, when you put the lockdown, people just get to a point where they believe you for a time. But when hunger comes in, everything else about COVID goes through the window. People don't care anymore because they'll tell you, look, I'd rather die of a disease than die of hunger. So this is the point where we are thinking it is now time to move from fantastic strategies on paper to actual implementation to build the resilience of the African people, of the African farmer. Otherwise, we are heading for real disaster. When Boko Haram struck in Nigeria, they killed people, about 81 to almost 100 of them, but they took away cattle. So you could see that food is still at the heart of this. They rustled cattle. They took grains away. So you can see even the fighters, the terrorists, as you call them, are also looking for food. So this is a big deal. And we need to understand that if you do not do something now and really take decided action, we have disaster waiting to happen on the African continent.
Well, Fadel, if I could ask you around, just to sort of continue with the point that you're making, just around the ability of countries to respond to a crisis at a time like this, when there are so many different factors converging at the same time. In this paper published by One and AGRA, there's a heading here under limited capacity to respond to food insecurity. This paper tells us that Rwanda has already led the way when it comes to things like introducing fixed prices on food, placing a limit on individual purchases on certain food items. Nigeria as well, releasing 70,000 metric tons of grains, particularly aimed at vulnerable people. But Fadel, the ability of all governments to respond the same way, it's just not possible. Not all governments have the capacity to put in stimulus measures and to support the poor.
Yeah, no, totally agree, Michelle. I think that's an extremely important point. I just want to go back to the issue of execution capacity. So I think the vision is there, the political is there. You have a significant challenge of walking the talk.
Yeah.
Now, the countries that managed to do it have planned for it. You mentioned Uganda, Rwanda, you mentioned Nigeria, Ethiopia. There are few countries in Africa that have systematically built plan, but also deliberately prioritize the institutional capability required to drive implementation. Now, and I think across the continent, this is why also we need to appreciate the peer review mechanisms that have been set up by the African Union, which really enable countries to share experience and start learning. Secondly, because countries also have different level of endowment in terms of natural resources, technology, and market development, for instance. But you also have a provision for regional food trade, which means surplus countries can actually sell to deficit countries. And that will promote an important objective of the African Union of starting to promote intra-Africa trade instead of continuing to import significant amount of food from other countries. But the point is still around capacity. Now, as part of our work at AGRA, we now understand much better, looking at really the trajectory of different countries, what it takes, what are the capacity requirements. Firstly, it starts with what Edwin was alluding to, a long-term vision of the role of agriculture, smallholder-based agriculture, for driving the economic growth. Unfortunately, many countries still continue smallholder agriculture like a charity, yet it's the driver to inclusive transformation. Because as you all know, it's more important to have limited gain over a large number of people than huge gain on few people. So the choice of supporting smallholder farming is crucial, and making sure that it becomes central in countries' long-term vision and priorities plan. That's a sign of commitment, but also a way of prioritizing and allocating resources. So that's one thing. But even when the money is there, unfortunately, some countries cannot absorb the resources. You have significant absorptive capacity challenge, which goes back to your ability to analyze, to plan, to execute, to assess, and go back to that cycle. This is why you need a competent bureaucracy around the Ministry of Agriculture, who is able to prepare very good plan, absorb the resources, provide all the accountability requirements that are needed. But this challenge is much bigger than government. And I think this is where the big opportunity is. This is where you need to really walk the talk around public-private partnership, specifically the small and medium enterprises on the continent. In our recent publication done as part of our agricultural status report, we refer to this segment as the hidden middle. These are your small traders, your seed company, the processor, the millers, the retailers. Now that industry, and this is also where the bulk of the employment of this continent, especially the youth employment, is. Finding effective way of supporting them is crucial. And unfortunately, it's not easy, because sometimes as government try to help, they actually undo. Because you can drive public inaction in a space that is meant for the private sector. You remove the incentive for private initiative. And this is what I'm saying, it's a balancing act. And this is where with you work with our policy and advocacy team, there is a significant focus on the right policy environment that create the incentives, the regulation, and the framework for a smooth functioning of that ecosystem. Earlier, I mentioned the delivery system, but all of this hinges on government creating really an orchestration plan. Let me call it that way. You have to be very intentional in matching the energy, the capability of youth and the private sector, and the public function that is required by creating fiscal and other kind of incentive that enable this private sector to deliver. I think this is where Michelle and Edwin, we all agree, progress is happening, but it requires significant innovation in the way financing is provided. Because these small SMEs require funding, but their requirement goes beyond just money. They also require technical assistance in order to build their own businesses. They require information on the nature of the demand and the opportunity. So if there is one keyword in all this conversation about data, we're lacking data. If you don't know what the problem is, if you can't see the opportunity, you can't fix it. So it's extremely important to start building capability in collecting, mining, analyzing data so that information, actionable information, is provided to the whole set of actors who have to work together in order to solve the problem. So COVID is really amplifying the challenge to us. If anybody didn't see, and the good news is we understand what it takes. It's not easy, but it's doable. It requires deliberate plan, It requires consistency. You cannot do change government and change. The countries that do it over time, we have experience on the continent around the world of countries who have transformed their agriculture. China is one of them. There are many others. Within a generation, Chinese have put more than 25 million people out of poverty. And the way they did, because they have a plan, they execute it. And if it doesn't work, they change it. And I think this is where we need a proper governance of the ag sector, which are able to reconcile private sector energy, technology, public sector investment, and also the role of civil society as a feedback, as an advocacy platform that is able to put the emphasis on the issues that are not on the forefront, so that we really deliver on the Africa 2060 agenda of inclusive transformation, the Africa we want. The plan are there, the vision is there, we need to do let's walk the talk.
So let me ask you this then, Fadel and Edwin, following on from what you've just said, COVID-19 exposing the challenges that already exist on the continent, taking data, mining through that data to guide decision making. We already know, and we've known for some time, that more than 60% of sub-Saharan Africa consists of farmers, that 20%, more than 20% of the continent's income comes from agriculture. So why, when you do a Google search on agriculture on the African continent, do you see headline after headline of agriculture spend being cut in this country and that country all over the continent?
Okay, let me quickly just say that, first of all, even with all of this, 60% of African population, involved in the agriculture sector, you will also realize that I'm trying to find the stat here in terms of the quantity of imports, food imports on the African continent. In fact, the reason why this our paper is so the emphasis on the hunger during the time of COVID is the terms of the price of goods or food, occasioned by international blockages, quotas that have come from major food exporting countries. There is, as we're speaking right now, there is no short supply of food globally. I hope we know that. But for many countries that are food import dependent, this is a big deal. It's a big deal because prices of food has gone up, and that just worsens. It wasn't the scenario, because for those who import food or depend on imported food, now they cannot afford it anymore. And for those who are producing locally, they cannot transport them in between. So we are increasing waste. While we are screaming of hunger and food insecurity in terms of access particularly, and there are some countries where food is being destroyed. So this is the contradiction that exists. And that is why it is important right now to begin to think about, and I can tell you, this is why the direction right now is thinking of how can people be food sufficient, food self-sufficiency, and how can the African continent become food self-sufficient. That is the goal, So, and like Dr. Fadel said, it takes decided action. First of all, it takes the capacity to analyze and understand where the challenge is. If over 60% of the population are involved in this sector, it means it is a singular sector that has the highest capacity to transform lives or to take people out of poverty. Because if investment in that sector increases productivity overall, that means you're affecting a large number of people, that are under the poverty bracket. And that is why you see the emphasis for us as one campaign, our emphasis on agricultural advocacy has been that it is one of the surest way to get rid of poverty on the African continent, because it affects a lot of people. So now, that being said, the question right now for us is, what needs to happen now that beyond, in terms of the number of people that will be affected? That is number one. So 60% of African population, that is a huge number, close to 500, 600 million people, right? So if you are not investing right, if you're not taking action now with COVID, right, with the drought and with the locusts, your disaster is looming. And now in that space, look at the number of young people that are unemployed. Right now, the data shows that over 22 million young people are entering the job market every year. So which sector has the capacity to absorb them? Right now, it's agriculture. And so there are other sector services that are coming up, investment that being made, but there is one we already know how to do, and that is the agriculture sector. So if you do not transform the sector in a way that can actually create jobs for these teeming young people that are getting to the job market every year, then that is another level of the problem. Then we have the way to transform the sector, because if you produce and you don't trade, people cannot buy. Like Dr. Fadel said, there are some countries right here on the African continent that are producing excess. There are some that are not producing enough. So this is a time to leverage the continental free trade area to allow the food corridors to really become functional, so that there is easy movement of produced goods across the African continent. That is when we can truly have fair food self-sufficiency. If these things don't work, if anybody thought it was a play, it was not urgent enough. I think the COVID situation has brought out the urgency of this matter. And this is the reason why you see One and AGRA are pushing hard to make sure that at least journalists that are on this in this briefing understand the drive that we are dealing with COVID now. We could be dealing with a lot worse situation, if drastic action is not taken at the moment. I mean, I've gone around the question, but I'm just trying to get the urgency of the matter.
Gentlemen, I want to just take a second to say it is 40 minutes now into this discussion. We want to get our journalists ready. Please get ready with the questions that you'd like to pose to our two panelists today. We'll get Fidel to respond to what we've just discussed around young people and unemployment. 22 million young people entering the jobs market every single year. Agriculture is the sector that is the answer, at least one of the biggest answers to alleviating poverty on the African continent. Fidel, once you've answered, we will take our first journalist question.
Yeah. So I think Edwin is absolutely right. It's agriculture. It's also agribusiness. Now, you see the reality is we are also dealing with the dilemma that even though 60% of people produce it and produce most of what we eat, the demand of food comes mainly from cities, where people have purchasing power and also have certain requirements in terms of quantity, quality. So the point I'm trying to make is not only we need to produce, but we need to do it in a competitive way. And this is why, to the question you asked earlier, despite the significance of the sector, some governments are relying on imports. Because I can give you an example. I mean, importing rice to Senegal is cheaper than producing it in Senegal, given the current circumstances. But this is where now you need to have the vision of building competitive economies over time. And to build on Edwin's point, you have huge opportunity around adding value addition, going beyond the basic raw material, processing it, packaging it, and distributing it. Provides significant opportunities for absorbing a significant amount of labor into those segments, beyond production, before production, beyond production, and in distribution, but meeting the requirement of the market. I think that's the reality, because we are working in a market economy. You can't force people to eat, something that doesn't meet their requirement. And again, this is where you need the policy incentive, you need support packages to the SME and to the producers. And we need to be able to identify commodities on which Africa has already a comparative advantage and promote regional, local, national, regional markets. So it's difficult to speak in very general terms, but in principle, around those elements of, firstly, you have significant margin of improvement of productivity. So 60% of these farmers, in the technical, we talk about yield gap. If they are producing 1, they can go to 5. Now, that progression is linked to their access to knowledge, to input, to infrastructure, and to markets. It goes back to the infrastructure, the ecosystem development that we're talking about, which is basically the outcome of a deliberate plan by government and the private sector to make it happen. Secondly, you also need a proper skilling of the young people, because agriculture is not the thing you do when you have failed to everything else. It requires a skill. So we need to look at the curriculum and the support package and the incubation platform. And many countries are doing a great job there. I think that will then enable us to really gradually capture this opportunity. Finally, we need also to educate the consumers around the quality of the product. in the end, we all vote for our continent and our countries. Same quality, same price, I will buy Africa. Same price, same quality, I will buy Chebujan. I will go for Senegalese meal. So somehow, I think we need, this is why, again, it becomes one campaign where you have concerted effort to make sure that we drive a sustainable food system that help us to strengthen the resilience of the continent, not only to COVID, but also to other shocks that are coming. This is only an amplification, but others are coming. The good news is some countries are currently building what they call climate smart investment plans. We support, there's some cooperation happening with some of our countries in our country. Morocco, for instance, are quite advanced in those resilience type of agriculture. And there is a lot of cooperation framework across the continent that we should encourage that enable us an exchange of skill and experience to make sure that we get prepared to absorb, to adapt, and to transform even under the worst case scenario.
All right. You know, we have been struggling to get this line going. Unfortunately, we don't have a video connection to Dr. Emma Naluyima, who is a smallholder farmer in Uganda, but she does join us now on the line. And Emma, we want to get this, we actually do have her over video. It's great to see you, Emma. We want to get your very important perspective. We've been talking about the importance of supporting smallholder farmers in various countries on the continent, but what is your particular experience been where you are, especially now with the arrival of COVID-19 and the support you've received from your government?
Thank you very much, Craig. The support we've received maybe is during the lockdown, we were considered essential. That's the only support we got. That despite the fact that everyone was told to rest, farmers were told to stay working, and then that's the only support. But I liked that because it helped us. It helped everyone get to know that farming is very, very essential. Farmers were the only people allowed to move with their trucks, and even if they find you with your truck, we've been having curfew. But even if you have curfew and they're past 7, of course you make sure that wherever you're going, you make sure you are within the curfew times. But in the event they gate you, as long as you have a hoe or a watering can or a jerrycan on your car and some food, they'll let you go. So that is very good support to us. But that financially and everything, no. But that was still very good because it made everyone get to know that farming is very, very important. Because while we had the lockdown, everyone needed to eat. So that was a good thing to us. We actually clapped our hands and said, wow, for the first time you've actually known that we are important. And then yesterday, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, the budget, the national budget came out, and some amount of money was increased, of course, was increased to agriculture. So these are very important things to us. And then I own a school. Right now I own a school that helps or teaches, trains young children, like the last presenter, I've forgotten his name. He has just been talking, Fadel. Fadel has just been talking about skilling. Now I, for one, because I used to see very many people coming here and they're asking ABCD, they don't know the technical know-how, and I'm like, okay, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And if the backbone of the nation is agriculture, we need to do something. And with my proceeds from the farm, we created a school, or we built a school. It's a very primary school, It's called MST Junior Academy, M standing for Math, Science and Technology. And why science? Agriculture is a science. So we needed to show people that agriculture is a science and it's very, very important. And what we do here is that we make everything revolved around agriculture. So we train the 3 things we think Africans should learn. And these are time management, value of money, and the culture of saving. Now, why? We believe if every African knows this, though we shall be better people. Why? Because the young children learn, and they play with the soil, they learn to love the soil, and then they get the proceeds. And when they get the proceeds, because when you're young, you think, I don't have any responsibility, so this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to buy candy. We're like, it's okay to buy candy, but can you learn how to save? So we train them how to save as well. Wow. And guess what? So when everything COVID came and we closed the school, you don't know how many phone calls I've been receiving from parents, other people from different schools saying, I want to join your school. So I, for one, much as we have all this you've talked about, we have the mishaps, I, for one, was happy that COVID came because it made everyone's eyes open and get to know that, oh, wait a minute, we need to eat. And if we need to eat, who brings the food? It's the farmers. And
wow.
so these are things that earlier on, farming, yes, everyone kept saying, yes, we need to farm. Like you just asked a question. We believe, every country believes that farming is important. But then they keep cutting on the budget when it comes to farming. But now they've woken up. They've woken up, they believe that, oh my God, we need to do ABCD. And I think right now, while we're in the COVID, there are so many webinars, every webinar in the country, 3/4 of them are about farming, about skilling the nation, so I just welcomed, irrespective of very little money coming in, but I'm happy. And actually, it's not so little that coming in when it comes to the farming, because we supply food. I have neighbors here, I supply food too. So every weekend I get some money from, and you know, it's so amazing. People call away from like maybe 100 kilometers from where I stay looking for food. So this is what happens. You've been talking about quality. The challenge we have is that farmers don't have the technical know-how, the technical skill, and we need to teach them that there's quality. Now, why we're having issues with the importation of food is because maybe when we farm, our food is not of good quality, okay? So maybe the expatriates and all these other people need to eat good quality food, because when they come in here, people from the UN, I know there's someone here in the UN, but when we have someone in the UN, when they come in, when they fly, this is what they tell them. When you get to Uganda, please go to ShopRite. They show them which places they should go to buy food, to buy, to drink. So this is, of course, I think their health. They are looking at them.
I think we're battling a little bit.
So this is.
Can all of our guests still hear us? I think we're battling just a little bit with our connection to each other.
Well, we can hear.
Emma,
can hear
I'm really
Emma.
sorry
I can hear you
to
now.
interrupt.
No, we can hear pretty well from our end.
Okay, go ahead, Emma.
So, and why they tell them to do this is because they know maybe things in our country are not of good quality, and they are looking at their health. But now, if we can train farmers and tell them, you know what, quality is very important. Like I've told you, I get phone calls from people from 100 kilometers from me, asking for pork, asking for vegetables. Why? Because they know I produce very good things and organic quality. So it's very, very important that when we are training farmers, we train them, apart from giving them the knowledge that they should farm, they give them the technical know-how, they also should tell them about the quality of the produce they give out there. And then another thing, because amid this COVID, another good thing that has come up is prices on buying data and internet connections have gone down, because everyone needs to do. We are now advocating for e-commerce, okay? So how are we going to sell our produce on social media and everything like that? A farmer out there doesn't have enough money to buy data for internet connection. So now these are some of the things that have made the government see us, or they've tried to see that we as farmers get there. And with the budget, like I've told you, everyone is now trying. Again, this COVID, as they were supplying food, some authorities were supplying seed, because it has been raining. While it's dry in West Africa and in other parts of the country, in Africa, it is raining here. It has been a blessing. Actually, that's why I say that, to me, I welcomed COVID. If you come and look, if I took my camera out, it would be like we're in Eden, because it is all green and we've been planting as much as possible. So this is what is going to happen after COVID. We shall have food, plenty of food. And then if it's going to be so much for us, then the next thing is to do processing or value chain, so that we make sure that this food is not wasted, because we have post-harvest losses. So we need those are some of the things we need to look at. But one thing a message I would like to pass on to Africans is that this is the time for us to look at like a comparative advantage or a competitive advantage that you see we are in the tropics, like here in Uganda, we're in the tropics. What can we plant? What can we grow that actually, even when people are like abroad or anywhere, they will still yearn for it. We have very many tropical fruits that everyone now, right now, amidst the COVID, if you get COVID, they will tell you, even in the health sector, they will give them vitamin C. They will tell them to eat very many fruits, lemon, all these things. But these are things that are naturally growing in Africa without even a hassle. I can't hear you.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Emma. We've been wanting to get your perspective and we're so enjoying to hear from you, but I fear I'm going to be in trouble with the journalists who have dialed in and who are still standing by to ask some of the important questions. But it's so great to hear from you that COVID-19 may well be the catalyst that we need on the African continent to acknowledge the role that agriculture has in alleviating poverty, hunger, unemployment. I want to please go to our first journalist to go ahead and ask a question, please. If there's anyone there who wants to jump in, please introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and give us your question.
I'm Dennis. Called Ruben FM, and I'm also the chairperson of Association of Grassroots Journalists Kenya. That is an umbrella for community journalists across the country. And first of all, I would like to congratulate Emma for the good work. Although everyone is praying, the pandemic to go away. But I think pandemics are a blessing to some of the Ugandan people. My question goes to Ndiame from Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa. We have seen the mechanism put in place by different stakeholders to ensure that Africa produces enough food. So my question is, are you working with farmers from marginalized areas? I will use an example of the northern part of Kenya, that is Turkana. Why do we have a malnutrition problem? Because there is no adequate food production in this region. So, Ndiame, what mechanism are in place to ensure that these areas get enough food? For example, we import apples from South Africa and Israel, yet Kenya is in a good position to produce those products.
Thank you for your question, Dennis. Fadel, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the question. And also thank you for noticing that a crisis is an opportunity that should not be wasted, to the point that Emma was making. Now, I think to your point, Dennis, the reality is, even though we talk about Africa, the continent, or even Kenya, the geographies are quite different in terms of their production potential. And it's generally very difficult to have one solution that applies across all geography. Now, the way we answer your question directly is, our first partner in Kenya is the government of Kenya. Good. Now, the government of Kenya has a plan for all the regions. And this is why, through the Ministry of Agriculture, we support their own plan to deploy the extension, the market, and the needed support to different regions. But because you mentioned Turkana, I just want to tell you that the problem there is very similar to what we have in part of West Africa, like Burkina Faso, Mali, etc. And I think the generic answer is, part of our work with the national government and the institution is to support the research institution come up with adapted responses to those circumstances. If you are dealing with a dry area, firstly, they are also typically not only doing agriculture, it's combined with livestock, etc. But the idea is you customize the package of technologies, advisory services, and market solutions that suit them. Now, part of what government does in Kenya and everywhere else is to also have support package for the most marginalized group, either through special safety net or through subsidy program that acknowledge that some of these communities have significant challenges. Actually, my starting point in this talk is smallholder farmer, by definition, have a significant opportunity, but they have a big challenge because of the nature of their scattered. And it's because you can't go and support everybody individually, you need to have facility. And the best facility here is government-owned program, extension program, delivered in whatever way the government has chosen to do. Now, especially at AGRA, we may not have a specific program in Turkana per se, because we cannot be everywhere. But we make sure that in places where we are, we generate technologies, option, policy advice, and recommendations that through government and our partners can be extended. But my final response to you is the big challenge behind your question is the good solution should be taken to scale. How do you scale out the good solution? And again, and this is why I'm still pushing for, you need a partnership with the private sector. You'll be surprised by especially in Kenya, the creativity of the entrepreneurs who are deploying digital. I'm so impressed with the payment system in Kenya that even the smallholder farmers are using M-Pesa. Now, how do we leverage those technology to provide useful information for traders, for livestock managers, or for farmers? So great question, but the short answer is we work through partners, and our main partner here is government, whose role is to bring on board the other players, including the other development partners. Thank you.
All right, I think our guests and our panelists have decided to stay on for perhaps an additional 5 minutes, maybe even 10 minutes. We've only had one journalist question so far. Please feel free to continue with the Q&A session. And if there are any other journalists who would like to pose some questions to our panel, introduce yourself, please give us your question.
I think journalists can also type in the question in case they're not able to speak on the chat window, and then Michelle can also read them.
With pleasure, definitely. Please feel free to go ahead. There's a little chat icon on the left of your screen there. If you want to just click on that, type in your question, and I can get it to our panel. Dennis, do you feel that you've gotten an answer to your question?
Yes, thank you so much, Ndiame, for your response. There was another question that I think Mr. Edwin should respond to this question. First of all, Mr. Edwin, I've heard a lot from you through Tumba. We talked much. The issue of malnutrition, because I know the issue of malnutrition is as a result of hunger, and there is no food. And Kenya, we are experiencing especially the nomadic region, the northern part of Kenya. So, as one African, what are you doing to ensure that you are going to collaborate with AGRA, that is the Alliance for the Green in Africa, in
the Alliance for a Green Revolution Forum, yes.
Okay. I think there's also some kind of background noise that is a bit, yeah. I think the main thing here in terms of malnutrition, so one campaign is an advocacy organization. So we do campaigns and advocacy. And I think the key agenda here is that we focus more on policy actions that are necessary to improve every development situation that we take up. And malnutrition is one of such key agenda. And the reason why this is important is that it is connected to other sectors like education. So when kids are not having the right nutrition, then it's difficult for them to learn. It affects their cognitive ability, and that itself affects their capacity to produce, to be more productive, later in life. So this is why food production and nutrition, are kind of tied together. A key agenda, and I think this has been covered, this has been mentioned by Emma in our talk, is there are very good nutritious food produced on the African soil. And that the agenda here is, how do we get the nutritious food we produce to reach every corner of Africa? And this is one of the reasons why our push on the implementation of the ACFTA is a key one that we keep promoting, so that in areas where there is low nutrition or access to nutritious food is limited, where it is produced in excess, there can be a free flow through a trade corridor that allows, food to go across the continent. But more importantly is that it has to be a deliberate action. So what we do, we canvass for policy actions to be taken, but we also try to make sure that when the government takes these policy actions, that people who are most affected actually benefit from it. So it's not about a charity, it's not a process of charity where we are saying give food to those who are malnourished, but it's about how do we, first of all, deal with the emergency by giving them access, giving people access to this food through we call for donor commitments in many areas, and so we continue to canvass donor communities to invest in food in the World Food Program and all the other programs that get the nutritious food to where it is needed most. But more importantly, the long-term solution is that we produce and trade among ourselves. From where it is produced in excess, it gets to those who are not able to produce at that level, and everybody is better for it. So that is how we intervene in the sector, because we are a campaigns and advocacy organization, and so we campaign at the policy level, and that is how our work on nutrition kind of reveal itself.
Thanks for that, Edwin. I'm just in the chat that is a part of our panel discussion, and I have Juliana Agbo, who wrote in the chat that they have a question to ask. I'm not sure if they'd like to ask that question on the video or whether they'd like to type it, but please go ahead with the question if you have one.
Good morning.
Good morning. Go ahead, please.
Okay. My name is Juliana from Nigeria. I write for the Nation newspaper. I must commend Nigerian farmers, and I must commend Nigerian government and Nigerian farmers. They've been doing so well, but the challenge most of our farmers have is technology, the use of technology. And this has been a very great challenge, especially those in the far-flung areas. I don't know if AGRA have anything in place to work on so that our farmers can get used to this. Like I heard the farmer from Uganda saying they had free data and all they were doing was e-commerce. But most of our farmers lack access to this. Is there anything you guys are doing to help us out with this?
Fadel, you've got that question?
Thank you so much. Is it Emma? What is the name again?
It's Juliana Agbo.
Juliana, yeah. No, sure. I think you have a very good point, Juliana. I think the issue of technology, access to technology is a crucial, really, intervention here. And I know that the government of Nigeria, through the different ministry, because we also work with the Federal Ministry of Agriculture, we have our team based in Abuja, but operating in a number of states, the Niger State and Kaduna State, and with significant intervention around technology deployment, seed, like agronomic practices, access to finance, but also access to market. Now, also use of digital solution. In fact, in Nigeria and other West African countries, one of the big challenges you have is if you have a combination of COVID, drought, and other challenges, it's become extremely important to have a swift execution of your cropping activities. So there are some very good innovative solutions around mechanization, even digitally driven mechanization. You have your Hello Tractor, basically by which some SMEs are able to provide support to smallholder farmers, either in land preparation, in harvesting, or processing of their produce. So there is a technology intervention in our program, but AGRA is not alone. You have so many other partners in Nigeria doing the same. And I think the big challenge is to support the government to make sure that the good solution can be deployed to much larger numbers. Just to give an example, and it's not an undue publicity, our friend Kola Masha drive a program called Babangona. It's one of the most innovative SME-driven support to farmer that I know, where they're able to work with them, avail access to information, to input, to insurance, to storage facility, and to marketing services. It's a total package that enables farmers to unlock value from their opportunity. The problem we have is these solutions are not really extended very widely, and I think we are all working together to make sure that all these innovative solutions can be deployed at scale so that everybody can take advantage of them. But I think that was a very good question. It's something we are all working very hard to make sure that through concerted action between government, development partners, private sector, and NGO, the good practices are shared and extended for the benefit of the majority. I think that's all I can say for now. Thank you.
No, I could just quickly add to say that, so it is not necessarily about intervention, it's also about how do you change an ecosystem. If there's anything that COVID has taught us right now is that digital is the new normal. And so any country that is not, thinking about improving the digital infrastructure, I'm really happy to hear the free data that the people in Uganda got, and then considering farming to be an essential service. In the early days of the response in Nigeria, it wasn't like that. The food and the farming became, was now added to the list of essential services only subsequently. But in terms of access to data, for instance, that we didn't get free data, on the continent, and that doesn't actually have to come from an AGRA, for instance, or a development partner. It should come from a policy decision that works with the private sector to say, okay, how do we help our people at scale? And I think this is the kind of cooperation, PPP, that we're talking about that should be the new normal. Digital is a new normal. For the majority of people in in Nigeria, for instance, it's not just the farmers. Many people in the rural areas cannot even afford to buy data. They cannot afford. So we need to be thinking more long-term, more strategic thinking of how do we improve, how do we reduce the price for cost of data? How do we make sure that the cost of accessing technology is not prohibitive? How do we get people to get into e-commerce? In Rwanda, we have and that is a key example that we'd like to showcase with the Alibaba platform that was launched. How many million tons of coffee was sold within a few days? This is the kind of thing demand straight in the hands of the farmers through technology. Kenya is demonstrating the same thing, right? So once we go digital, then we can democratize access. And this is the new thing that we are pushing for, to say, one, improve the digital infrastructure, reduce the digital divide, and get everybody on board, and then we can access a global market. So this is a policy decision that has to be made, and it has to be pursued, and we're really supporting every other player in this space.
All right, thank you very much for your question, Juliana. We have one more question coming to us via our chat line here on the conversation. It comes from Pius, who is joining us on the call from Kenya. And this is his question. We see that the dry parts in Kenya are now receiving lots of rain, but this means they have to start a new way of life. I feel much attention should be given to these farmers. I think from you, Edwin, and from you, Fadel, perhaps some comments on that particular issue there in Kenya, and then final comments as we wind down our conversation today.
Pius, actually, I think he's highlighting a very important issue. It's not only true for Kenya, that's part of the reality of climate change. I think either because of changes in the pattern of rainfall the old way of farming has to be constantly reviewed and changed. And this is really the resilience issue we're talking about. Supporting smallholder farmers with the right type of variety. If you are a shorter rainy season, you need an early maturing variety. You need a completely different set of agronomic practices. So that requires, I think that's at the heart of the climate smart intervention policy that I was talking about. Secondly, and I have a friend who used the famous formula, the plant needs water, not rain. Which means there is another shift that we need to do mentally is you should create the condition for you to farm and insulate yourself from just those variations, because some of them you cannot control. And this is why coming up with water conservation measure, adapt good agronomic practices, changing your cropping pattern is all a part of the supporting the smallholder farmer to be resilient, to adapt, to absorb, and transform. And to the point that Edwin was making, this requires a whole policy framework that avail those options to our smallholder farmer. It's true for part of Kenya, it's true for most of West Africa. When some countries are struggling because the raining season is coming too quickly. They don't even have time to move out the production of the previous season. So I think those are the challenges now that working with the private sector and government, we can come up with innovative way of storage management, post-harvest management, but also changing your cropping system to accommodate the changing environment.
Fadel, before you wind down in your closing comments, there is one question that is directed at you, and I think that this will be our final question as we head now for 12:20. This is the question to you, Fadel. A new report shows that most of the funding and focus is on industrial agriculture, with focus on green revolution, and yet it's not successful. Is AGRA likely to change tact and focus on agroecology?
No, I love that question because, and I would like to know the person who asked that question, but I think
that is SCP-SU.
Okay, now, dear SCP-SU, you have to know, I mean, to use your language, AGRA is in a green revolution. You know, in other words, we don't believe that you have a miracle solution that you apply across the board. We believe that you need to come up with uniquely adapted solutions to the African circumstances. And I think our reference to green revolution is a metaphor to say we should assemble all the set of intervention, starting with the soil fertility management. It's not only about miracle seed. AGRA doesn't do miracle seed. We build an ecosystem that empower farmers, SMEs, and government to deploy the appropriate innovation. They can be technological, they can be institutional, they can be financial. So I think AGRA, as many others, we are adapting and learning. And the focus now of our work is around inclusive agricultural transformation, with an emphasis on making sure that people can drive their own change. I think let's also not fall in the trap of thinking there is a conspiracy theory somewhere there. If there is one thing that COVID-19 have revealed to all of us is we have to take responsibility for our own change, understanding the problem, inventing the solutions that suit us, deploying it, and accounting to our society. I think AGRA is a partner of African government and African private sector and African farmers. We are invited by millions of them, and we are very happy to put our small contribution in supporting their own effort to transformation. I think this is what I want to tell my friend. We are totally for agroforestry, sustainable agriculture, but at the end of the day is doing the right thing based on your concrete circumstances. To produce good, you have to do good, do well in a sustainable way. If I can leave you with a tweetable formula, do good, do well in a sustainable way. That's our agenda.
Thank you.
Final comments from you, Edwin?
Okay, thank you. I think I would just wrap up by saying, what do we need, within this space, within this emergency, this different, issues that are exacerbating the problem of food on the African continent? The first one is that Africa can feed itself. That is true. So we need to create those corridors to enable the free flow of food from where it is produced more to where it is produced less. That opening that corridor is a key is a key agenda that Africa must follow. We need to also think about how we invest in local agriculture production. And in this case, creating the environment from the government giving us the right environment, the private sector coming in, in partnership with smallholders who are doing so it is profitable. The third one is, because we are a human race, it's not happening in one place, and none of us are safe until all of us are safe. Every protectionist measure that is in place right now should be dismantled, so that at least the whole globe will see themselves as one human race that should not, that should be standing in solidarity. We should have a global plan, a solidarity that covers everybody. We cannot keep ourselves and think we are insulated from others. And then the final thing I would say is that we need to expand social safety net for small scale farmers, because they are so vulnerable. The last question in terms of the shocks, the climate shocks that are coming in, the Boko Haram or terrorists in East Africa or West Africa, wherever they are coming from, all of this make us so vulnerable. And that resilience is not there until we also expand our social safety net. And to do that, we need a fiscal muscle, we need a fiscal space. And that is why we are calling on the international community to stand in solidarity with Africa, give us a debt standstill so that we have the fiscal liquidity to be able to respond locally to the measures that we have to do. Those, for me, are key recommendations I think, we should be calling for as the African people.
Emma, as we wind down our conversation now, Emma, some final comments from you. It's always great to see you when you're able to pop up on the screen.
Thank you. Final comment is governments or policies should help smallholder farmers with making circles, because we said we are so diverse. But then how are we going to be able to work together? Is by making cooperatives and making sure that whatever either policies or financial assistance goes through cooperatives. And then another thing is to educate. Educate the farmer, educate the mother, the woman, and educate the children. If we do that, then we are going to have a better continent. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Please educate the husband also, Emma. Please educate the husband and the brother, please. Please, thank you.
Well, thank you very much to our list of panelists, our 4 panelists, Dr. Emma Naluyima, who is a smallholder farmer in Uganda. It was great to get you online when we could finally sort out the gremlins in the system. Dr. Fadel Ndiame, the Deputy President at AGRA, thank you as well for your time. And of course, Edwin Ikhouria, who is ONE's Africa Executive Director, leading ONE's advocacy right across the African continent. And to our journalists as well, thank you for dialing in and thank you for your questions as well. Certainly the start of really just scraping the surface of this issue, but echoing what Edwin has said throughout this conversation, agriculture, this sector is able to change lives. It's able to change how the economy survives, how it works on resilience. It's one of the surest ways to get rid of poverty in Africa. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to our panel discussion today.
Thank you.